Okay, strategists, gather around the digital table because today we are talking about a game that's near and dear to any wargaming enthusiast's heart,
Hmm.
Axis and Allies.
Yeah.
We're talking epic battles, global domination, and just enough dice rolling to keep you on the edge of your seat.
And the beauty of it is there's an Axis and Allies for everyone.
Right.
Whether you're a seasoned general or a fresh recruit, but with 17 editions out there, choosing your battleground can be a bit daunting.
Oh, yeah. You sent us a mountain of material on this one.
That's a lot.
Luckily, we've got Paul Bellows' Ultimate Guide to Axis and Allies board games as our trusty field manual.
There you go.
He's been playing and collecting these games for ages, so he's the perfect guide to navigate this war game wilderness.
Yeah, Bello doesn't just list out the editions, though, and that's what makes his guide so valuable. He really gets into the soul of each one, the history, the mechanics, the strategic nuances. He even gives solid advice for collectors.
Perfect, because what good is a deep dive without some buried treasure?
Right.
Speaking of history, before we get into the specifics of each edition, let's rewind to 1981.
Okay.
The original Axis and Allies hits the shelves, published by No VA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wasn't even born yet,
Wow.
but I can only imagine this was a game changer.
Oh, think about it. This was before personal computers were a common household item. Risk was the go-to strategy game, and why fun, it was pretty basic.
Yeah.
Then comes Axis and Allies, with its detailed miniatures, economic management, varied unit types. It was a whole new level of complexity and depth.
It's like the difference between playing checkers and suddenly finding yourself in a game of 3D chess. So for our listener who might be new to this world, what are the core mechanics that make Axis and Allies? Well, Axis and Allies.
At its heart, it's a game of resource management and strategic decision-making. You've got two teams, the Axis, Germany, Japan, and sometimes Italy,
Okay.
facing off against the Allies, the US, the UK, the Soviet Union, and occasionally others. The game is played in turns, and this is key. Each turn represents a whole year of war.
Whoa, a whole year.
Yeah.
So you can't just be making rash decisions. You have to think long-term, anticipate your opponent's moves, and plan accordingly.
Exactly. And within each turn, you're producing units moving your armies and fleets, waging battles, and trying to capture key territories and capitals. The goal isn't just to wipe out every enemy unit on the board, though.
Because this isn't some mindless slugfest.
Right. It's about achieving victory through a combination of military conquest and economic domination. You're managing your industrial output represented by those little factories you control on the map, and that determines how many tanks, planes, and ships you can build.
Okay, so there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. You can't just throw armies around willy-nilly like in some other war games.
No.
You have to be smart, strategic, and maybe just a little bit ruthless.
It helps.
But where do we start if we want to actually play? Bellows' guide breaks down a whopping 17 editions. So we're going to tackle this by category, not just by release date.
Absolutely. Let's say you're brand new to Axis and Allies.
Yeah.
Bello recommends dipping your toes in the strategic waters with Axis and Allies. 1941, which came out in 2012.
Okay.
It's specifically designed as a more streamlined entry point.
So less overwhelming for us newbies.
Exactly, fewer unit types to keep track of a slightly smaller map and a faster playtime overall. It's all about getting those core mechanics down pat without getting bogged down in too many rules.
Got it. Learn the basics before you try to conquer the world.
Right.
So once you've mastered the 1941 edition, what's the next step on this strategic ladder?
Bello suggests Axis and Allies. Spring 1942. Don't let the name fool you. It actually came out a few years before the 1941 edition, back in 2009.
Okay.
It's still considered a great stepping stone from the more complex editions, but introduces a bit more strategic depth compared to 1941.
Now, this is where things get really interesting for me, and I bet our listener will appreciate this too. Bella mentions that Spring 1942 was actually revised based on player feedback.
Yeah.
The designers listened to the community and tweaked the rules to improve the balance and flow of the game.
And that's what's so great about the Axis and Allies community.
Yeah.
It's passionate, engaged, and the designers have often taken that feedback to heart.
It speaks to the game's legacy for sure. Okay, so we've covered the beginner options, but what about those of us who are ready for the main course, the additions that solidified Axis and Allies as a true wargaming legend? Where do we go next?
Now we're talking about the classics. You can't discuss Axis and Allies without mentioning the 1984 Classic Edition.
Right.
This is when Milton Bradley acquired the game from Novier, and it really exploded in popularity.
This is the one with those awesome detailed miniatures, right?
Exactly.
No more cardboard cutouts.
They really upped the ante with the components. The map got bigger, the artwork improved, and the rules were refined even further. For many, this IS Axis and Allies.
It's like the game grew up, got a whole new wardrobe, and was ready for prime time.
Right?
But then fast forward a couple of decades to 2004, and we get Axis and Allies. Revised Edition Bello makes it clear this one holds a special place in the hearts of longtime fans.
It does, and for good reason. The Revised Edition was a direct response to years, literally years, of player feedback.
Wow.
The community was passionate about this game, and the designers actually listened. They fixed balance issues, streamlined certain rules. Imagine, for example, the Soviets constantly being overrun in the early game. Well, in the Revised Edition, they made Moscow a little tougher to crack, just enough to make things more balanced.
Talk about a game that evolved alongside its community. That's impressive.
Ah.
But for those who want the ultimate classic experience, there's the 50th Anniversary Edition, right, from 2008.
Now, that is a collector's item. I mean, the components are gorgeous, top-of-the-line stuff. But more importantly, they added Italy as a fully playable nation.
Wow.
And let me tell you, that throws a huge GE wrench into the strategic equation, especially for the Allies.
Okay, I can see how that would shake things up. No more Italy just being a speed bump on the way to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean strategically?
Well, imagine you're the Allies, and suddenly you've got to defend a whole other front. Do you divert troops from North Africa, risk leaving your flank exposed? It adds this delicious layer of complexity. And for the Axis, having Italy as an ally can be a game changer, especially in the Mediterranean.
So we've got options for beginners and we've got our classic editions. But say you want to really zero in on a specific front, a specific theater of war. Does Axis and Allies have something for that kind of focused strategy?
Absolutely. That's where the regional editions come in. We've got Axis and Allies, Europe, which was released in 1999, and Pacific, which came out in 2001. As their name suggests, they let you focus your strategic genius on just one area of the conflict.
So Europe is all about those classic land battles, blitzkriegs, trench warfare, that sort of thing.
You've got it. Europe is fascinating because it introduces the concept of economic warfare. You're not just capturing territory, you're trying to cripple your opponent's ability to wage war by seizing vital industrial centers. It adds a whole other layer of strategic thinking.
And Pacific, I'm guessing, is all about naval power?
Mm-hmm.
Island-hopping carrier battles, controlling those crucial sea lanes?
Right on target. It's a totally different strategic beast. In the Pacific, naval dominance is non-negotiable. You need to control the seas to have any hope of victory. You're thinking about battleships, aircraft carriers, submarines, and securing those vital supply lines that stretch across the vast Pacific.
For anyone who's ever dreamt of commanding a fleet of destroyers and launching air raids, that sounds right up their alley.
It is.
But there's another edition that focuses on a single event, a truly pivotal moment in World War II. Axis and Allies. D-Day from 2004. What makes this one stand out?
D-Day is like a pressure cooker of strategy. It's intensely focused on the Normandy landings. You're not managing a global war effort here. You're trying to pull off one of the most daring and complex military operations in history.
I can see how that would appeal to a certain type of player. Someone who loves historical accuracy and really getting into the nitty-gritty tactics of a specific battle.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic way to experience history firsthand. Understand the challenges faced by both the Allies and the Axis, and see how even the smallest decisions can have huge consequences.
Okay, we've got global domination-focused campaigns, but what about our listeners, who are all about the logistics? The ones who get a thrill out of perfectly optimized supply lines. Bello hasn't forgotten them, has he?
Not a chance. For those players, there's Axis and Allies, Battle of the Bulge from 2006. This edition is a love letter to logistics, introducing supply lines as a core mechanic. It adds this incredible level of realism.
So it's not just about where you move your units, but how you keep them supplied, fueled, and ready to fight.
Precisely. A tank division might be powerful, but it's useless if it runs out of fuel in the middle of an offensive. You need to secure those supply routes, establish depots, and keep those resources flowing to the front lines.
Logistical mastery, the unsung hero of many a military victory. But we can't talk logistics without mentioning the granddaddy of them all. The one that separates the casual conquerors from the truly dedicated. Axis and Allies. Global 1940.
This is it, the Everest of Axis and Allies.
I'm getting intimidated just thinking about it.
It combines the Europe 1940 and Pacific 1940 editions into one colossal game.
No.
We're talking a map that barely fits on a table, hundreds of units, and a level of complexity that would make a supercomputer sweat. This is for players who want the ultimate challenge, the ultimate test of their strategic prowess.
This is a weekend-long campaign, maybe even longer. You need snacks, strategic reserves of caffeine, maybe even a designated note-taker to keep track of everything.
It's an epic undertaking, no doubt about it. But for those who crave that level of immersion, that feeling of commanding a global war effort, there's simply nothing else like it.
Okay, so we've got options for beginners, seasoned veterans, armchair admirals, logistical masterminds. But then Bello throws a curveball with Axis and Allies. 1914, taking things back to the trenches of World War I, that's got to change the whole dynamic, right?
Completely. 1914 is all about trench warfare, which means static lines attrition and a much slower pace compared to the rapid offensives of World War II.
So less blitzkrieg, more strategic stalemate.
Exactly. It's a completely different type of war, a war of inches rather than miles. You're thinking about breaking through heavily fortified lines, coordinating massive artillery barrages, and managing your resources carefully because every loss is felt more keenly.
So a totally different strategic puzzle to solve. Now, before we wrap up this section on the different editions, we have to at least touch on Axis and Allies miniatures. This is where those beautifully detailed miniatures get to take center stage, right?
This one's a bit of a departure from the main board game series. It's more about tactical skirmishes than global conquest, more akin to Warhammer than traditional Axis and Allies. But if you love collecting and painting miniatures, or you enjoy a more fast-paced tactical combat experience, the miniatures game has a lot to offer.
A whole other world to explore.
Yeah.
Bello gives a good overview of the different factions, units, and expansions in his guide. It sounds like there's a lot to unpack there for those who are interested.
Definitely. But before we jump into collecting and the legacy of Axis and Allies, I think it's important to touch on something Bello highlights in his guide. The strategies that work best for different editions. Because what wins you the day in 1941 might not cut it in global 1940, right?
You're telling me that's like bringing a knife to a tank battle.
Right.
So let's talk general strategies first. What are some universal truths in the Axis and Allies universe, regardless of which edition you're playing?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking universal strategies for Axis and Allies. Those golden rules that hold true no matter what battlefield you choose. Where do we start?
Bello emphasizes that above all else, economic management is key. You can have the biggest, baddest tanks in the world, but if you can't afford to build them, it's all for nothing.
It's like they say an army marches on its stomach, and in this case, on its oil reserves and industrial output.
Exactly. You need to control those resource-rich territories, those industrial powerhouses that fuel your war machine. For example, imagine you're playing as Germany and you've swept through Western Europe. You might be tempted to immediately throw everything you've got at Moscow.
Go for the knockout punch.
Right. But if you haven't spent time building up your industrial capacity, you'll quickly find yourself overextended out of resources and vulnerable to a counterattack.
So as tempting as it might be to go all in on those early offensives, you can't neglect the economic engine driving your war effort.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And another crucial strategy that applies across editions, especially for the Allies, is the importance of cooperation. This is a team game, after all.
Right, you're not just fighting your own little war in a corner of the map.
Yeah.
You've got to work together, coordinate your attacks, share resources if the edition allows for it.
Absolutely. Imagine, for instance, that you and your ally are both hammering away at a heavily defended enemy position. It might be tempting to try and outshine each other, be the one to deliver the final blow. But if you coordinate your attacks, time them strategically, you can overwhelm the enemy and achieve a much swifter, more decisive victory.
It's like a well-choreographed dance, except instead of graceful pirouettes, we're talking about strategic bombing runs and coordinated tank assaults.
Exactly. But of course, Bello also dives into edition-specific strategies because, as we've discussed, each one offers a unique strategic puzzle to solve.
Right, a winning tactic in 1941 might be utterly useless in Global 1940. So give us a taste of some of those edition-specific pointers. What should players keep in mind?
Well, let's take the Pacific editions as an example. Naval dominance is absolutely paramount. If you don't control the seas, you're not going to get very far. You need to be thinking about securing those crucial sea lanes, using your aircraft carriers, effectively launching amphibious assaults.
Island hopping, cutting off supply lines, classic naval warfare strategies.
Exactly. Whereas in the Europe editions, the focus shifts more towards land battles, controlling key territories, managing your supply lines. It's a different kind of war, a war fought over every inch of ground.
And those supply lines become even more critical in Battle of the Bulge, where logistics take center stage.
Precisely. You really have to think like a quartermaster in that edition, making sure your troops are supplied and equipped for those crucial battles.
And what about Global 1940? I imagine that edition requires a whole other level of strategic thinking.
Oh, absolutely. It's a game of patience, resource management, and knowing when to strike and when to hold back. You've got to be able to think on multiple fronts, anticipate your opponent's moves, and adapt your strategy accordingly.
So you need to be a master of both the strategic A&D, the tactical, able to manage the big picture while also capitalizing on those smaller opportunities as they arise.
Exactly. Global 1940 is not for the faint of heart, but the rewards for victory are that much sweeter.
Now, Bella doesn't just talk general strategies, right? He gets into some pretty specific advice for playing as different nations.
He does, and it's really insightful stuff. For example, let's say you're playing as the United Kingdom. Bello suggests that in the early game, your best bet is to play defensively. Hold on to your island fortress, use your navy to control the seas, and buy yourself time to build up your forces.
Batten down the hatches, weather the storm, and then strike back when the time is right.
Exactly. Whereas if you're playing as Japan, your strategy needs to be much more aggressive.
Oh.
You often start with a smaller industrial base than your opponents, so you have to take risks, expand quickly, and capitalize on those early game opportunities.
A classic case of the best defense is a good offense, right?
Precisely. But it's a delicate balancing act. If you're too aggressive, you risk overextending yourself and leaving your home territories vulnerable.
So each nation demands its own unique approach, its own strategic personality, so to speak.
Exactly. And Bello provides some really great insights into how to master each one.
This deep dive is turning into a masterclass in Axis and Allies strategy. But before we send our listeners off to conquer the world, we've got to talk about the collecting aspect. Bella dedicates a whole section to it, and I have to admit, I'm fascinated by the idea of these games becoming collector's items.
It makes sense, though, right? These games have been around for over 4 decades. They hold a special place in a lot of gamers' hearts.
So for those looking to start their own Axis and Allies collection, what are some of the holy grails, the ones that get collectors drooling?
Well, the granddaddy of them all, the 1981 AVA edition, is obviously highly sought after. But good luck finding a copy in good condition, especially the original box. We're talking potential 4-figure price tags.
Wow, so a mint-condition copy of Axis and Allies could pay for a pretty nice vacation. What else?
The 50th anniversary edition, with its gorgeous components, and the edition of Italy is another one that's highly collectible. And then there are the out-of-print editions, especially the regional ones like Europe and Pacific, which tend to go up in value over time.
So raiding your parents' attic might be a good weekend activity. You never know what vintage board game gems you might uncover. But condition is key, right?
Mm-hmm.
A box full of water-damaged components and missing pieces isn't exactly a collector's dream.
Definitely not. Bello emphasizes that for collectors, condition is everything. He even gives some great tips on how to preserve your collection, like using card sleeves, storing your games properly.
Treating those little plastic tanks and battleships like the precious artifacts they are. I love it. Okay, so we've explored the vast world of Axis and Allies. We've talked about the different editions, the strategies, the collecting aspect. But what does it all mean? Why should our listeners care about this game even if they've never rolled a die in their life?
That's a great question, and I think Bello answers it beautifully in his introduction. He talks about how Axis and Allies isn't just a game, it's an experience. It's a way to step back in time to immerse yourself in one of the most pivotal periods in human history and to test your strategic skills against friends and family.
It's like becoming an armchair, general plotting campaigns, making those tough decisions that could alter the course of history even if it's just on a cardboard battlefield.
Exactly, and I think there's something incredibly compelling about that. But beyond the historical aspect, Axis and Allies teaches you valuable skills that translate to the real world. Critical thinking, problem-solving, resource management.
And let's not forget the importance of collaboration, especially in the team-based editions. Because as much fun as it is to be the lone wolf, sometimes you need to work together to achieve a common goal.
Couldn't agree more. And that's something that's often overlooked in our hyper-competitive world. But here in the world of Axis and Allies, it's not just encouraged, it's essential for victory.
So there you have it, listener. Your deep dive into the captivating world of Axis and Allies. We've journeyed through its history, explored its many editions, and uncovered the strategic depths that lie within. We've even touched on the thrill of collecting and the game's enduring legacy. But now it's up to you to choose your battleground.
Will it be the streamlined action of 1941? The classic challenge of the revised edition? Or perhaps the epic scope of Global 1940?
Whatever your choice. Remember, an Axis and Allies history is written by the victors. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, this deep dive has sparked a strategic fire in your soul.
And if it has, we've done our job.